First of all, I'd like to thank Tsai CITY for all their hard work in putting this event together. And Noah, Will, we're thrilled to have you guys here. I'm David Fleming, a junior in Morse, and I'm director of the Yale Inspire series, and super excited to be interviewing Noah and Will today. So let me give you a bit about their background. So Noah is the founder and CEO of Olo, a B2B SaaS company that develops online ordering and delivery services for restaurants, striving to achieve their mission of hospitality at scale. In the company's 19-year history, Noah's grown Olo from a fledgling startup into a $250 million revenue company that went public in March of 2021 at a $3.6 billion valuation. Before Olo, he studied political science at Yale, where he played on the varsity lacrosse team and was a member of the a cappella group Baker's Dozen. After graduating from Yale in 2003, Noah worked at Endeavor Global for 2 years, where he was an international expansion manager and launched the first Endeavor affiliate offices in Africa. Will Bernstein is Vice President and Chief of Staff to the CEO at Olo, Noah. He spent nearly 5 years at Olo, prior to which he worked at Gramercy Tavern in New York City and spent a year as a business analyst at Zoom in Greenwich. Will graduated from Yale in 2018, where he earned a degree in history and urban studies and led the Bulldogs to win the Ivy League championship as the team captain on the varsity golf team. Now let's please give a warm welcome to Noah and Will. So let's start a bit by discussing the relationship between you two. So Noah, you graduated Yale in 2003, and Will, you graduated in 2018. So how'd you guys meet, and what did you see in each other that made you know you wanted to work together?
Well, first, Claire, thank you so much for the warm welcome, and David, thank you for interviewing and for that wonderful introduction as well. So I think I met Will about 6 years ago, if my memory serves, and at the time, he was, of course, not working at Olo, but we met in our offices in One World Trade Center on the 82nd floor. And at the time, I think Will was at Zoom Pizza, which was another restaurant tech startup company. And before even that happened, I kept on getting these LinkedIn nudges from this very persistent guy named Will Bernstein. and that was one thing that I took note of, because I find so many people don't bother to write. And if they do write, they sort of write once and never follow up. And one thing that I took note of with Will, I liked the Yale background, of course, the passion for hospitality and technology, but the fact that he was persistent and really had this drive of wanting to connect. So we met, and it was sort of not the best first meeting. There wasn't really much for the two companies to do together, but I definitely took note of Will, and in that meeting, that same sort of curiosity and determination. And so, about a year later, hearing that Will was on the market and looking for a new opportunity, I thought, I don't really know what we're going to do with this guy. We don't have a burning need for exactly what he knows how to do. The Zoom Pizza experience wasn't directly translatable, but he felt like a really smart and determined and scrappy guy, and somebody that I thought would be a great asset for the company. And so years after that, Will became my chief of staff, and that was a very exciting transition, but it was only after really working on the job together and learning that all of that was true and then some. Well, I'll let you tell your side of the story.
Yeah, I mean, that all resonates, and it shows you the value of, taking the initiative and reaching out and going the extra mile to really get what you want in life. And I think it shows you the value, too, of the Yale network. And me, 23 years old at the time, getting a meeting with Noah Glass, very hot restaurant tech startup. I think at the time, Noah was rated the #1 most powerful person in the restaurant industry, which is quite the thing to be named. $1 trillion industry, and all of a sudden I was in the room with him, pitching him on some probably bogus idea of what we should do together with Olo and Zoom Pizza. But yeah, I'll just always remember that moment and Noah's kindness in responding to the message, and it led to a change of trajectory in my career, which is why I'm here today.
Well, that's fantastic. So glad you guys worked together. And Will, you got in a great time when you guys started really seeing liftoff in the company.
Noah did all the hard work.
So let's discuss a bit of Olo's origin story. So it was founded in New Haven, and you were working in Endeavor at the time. So how did you come up with the idea, and what made you convinced that the idea was worth pursuing?
Yeah, well, so I left Yale in 2003, and I moved to New York City. In between, I did a bicycle trip with Habitat for Humanity across the country, and during that trip I was thinking about a lot of entrepreneurial things, but the thing that sort of lingered in my head that I couldn't shake was this idea that we were all going to be walking around with supercomputers in our pockets in the immediate future. I was lucky enough at the time to have a Palm Pilot. It was a very strange thing for a 22-year-old to have at the time, but I just found playing lacrosse, being on the road, it was sort of an easy way of me having my schedule with me at all times. When I moved to New York City, I became convinced that a Palm Pilot or something like it was going to evolve, and it was going to become web connected, and it was going to have with it all of our personal likes and dislikes, our ability to pay for things with payment credentials embedded within it, and a sort of location awareness that would enable a different form of e-commerce, which was quite popular at the time, but it was all about ordering something from a desktop and having it shipped to you. And so I really believe we were all going to get these devices, and it was going to change this very basic industry that I'd grown up with in high school. And shout out to my mom, she is here in the front row, always the supporter. But we're from Newton, Massachusetts, and I grew up working in the pizza delivery space. So I'd seen kind of that side of the business, and I knew that it was really inefficient, and that if you could apply some of the magical superpowers of e-commerce to that food ordering experience, it would be both good for the guest and it would be good for the operator. The guest could order ahead, pay ahead, have their food ready and waiting when they walked into a coffee shop or a restaurant. The operator could then process multiple orders at the same time. And it wouldn't be that serial process of one guest after another, everybody standing in line, but you could have multiple orders come in and you could really max out the capacity of the kitchen. So I really felt like this was the right moment in time. Again, this is 2003 when I first started thinking about this, when I first put pen to paper on a business plan. And it really wasn't until 2005 that I had the conviction that I had to move forward with this. What really gave me that conviction was I lived in 2004 in Johannesburg, South Africa. I was launching the office for Endeavor. And I know Linda Rotenberg, the CEO of Endeavor, is going to be here speaking on November 4th. She was my boss for those first 2 years out of college, and she likes to say she's still my boss because she's a longstanding OLO board member and the chair of our comp committee. But she gave me the ability to meet all these great entrepreneurs in Johannesburg, South Africa, and really feel like this is in me. I've got to become an entrepreneur. I've got to take this jump, and I'll regret forever if I don't make this leap and try this idea. I also met David Frankel, who is our seed investor and the longest standing board member at OLO, himself a very successful entrepreneur, went off to business school, heard the Endeavor case study that Linda gave at Harvard Business School, and then was the driving force in getting Endeavor to South Africa, and in so doing, getting me to South Africa. I became very close with David. I really learned from him as a mentor. And at one point, I think the old adage is, if you're looking for money, ask for advice. If you're looking for advice, ask for money. I was going to David for advice and saying, what should I do? I'm supposed to start at Harvard Business School, but I have this idea, and I really think that there's something in this idea. What should I do? And David ultimately said, look, I believe in you after working with you for this year. If you believe in this idea enough that you're willing to tell Linda that you're quitting Endeavor and withdraw your admission to Harvard Business School, basically burn the boats, so the only path forward is doing this company, I'll back you. I'll give you your first $500,000 check. And it was a scary moment, but it was scary because I really knew I had to jump and do it. The harder of those two things was definitely telling Linda that I was leaving Endeavor, by the way. But it was an incredible moment and such a gift to only have that path forward and to have to make it work. And so that was really, I had built this kind of nights and weekends project of a prototype of the technology, had shown that to David. It was not in a working model. It really needed a lot of work after kind of a demo of what it could do, basically the ability to build an order, submit the order, and have it pulled onto a computer screen, which was meant to represent the point of sale system at the restaurant. But it was a great demonstration of that idea that had only lived in my head or on paper in a business plan, alive in the world. and then I had the funding to go and really pursue it full bore.
So in some ways, you're betting your whole company on the universalization of the iPhone. You're hoping that'd be in everyone's pocket, right?
So the funny thing is that iPhone didn't exist.
Yeah.
iPhone, it hadn't even been announced. It wasn't even announced until 2 years later. It was really just the vision that there will be something like an iPhone, and we will all have this thing, and it will do the magical things that an iPhone can do, and that will change the restaurant industry. So it was a pretty big leap of faith. And of course, when we then launched in New York City, when I came back to New York City, it was only 5% of mobile phone users that even had anything that could be described as a smartphone. And these were not particularly smartphones. These were Blackberries or Palm Treos. The rest were flip phones. They could send text messages, and that was it. And people were learning how to do that. But the idea that this thing was a remote control for buying coffee or buying food, very few people were thinking about that, and a lot of people thought it was crazy.
Wow. So you're in Africa, you have this idea, and then you come back to the United States in New York, and what happens there?
So what happens there immediately after I came back was that I met my now wife, and we decided to move in together. And the first day that we moved in together, June 1st of 2005, is the day that we officially launched what is now Olo. So it was a very big day in my life, and I remember opening the bank account, getting the wire transfer in, and then coming back to our original apartment on the Upper West Side. My wife was there kind of preparing to start at Columbia Law School. And I remember just lying on the couch and saying, well, what do I do next? I have no idea where to start or where to go. And my wife really sort of dropped everything at the time, postponed her start at Columbia Law School, and came on as our original chief marketing officer and came up with the plan for how we were going to get started. And the plan was coming back to New Haven. And the idea was get started in a place where you can do a first restaurant location, and you can do it a little bit out of the eye of media attention. And what we wound up doing was working with, yes, Yale Entrepreneurial Society. So it's sort of a homecoming to be back here with this group. And we launched our first location at what is now Common Ground, I believe. It used to be Coffee 2, and then it was Blue State Coffee, now it's Common Grounds. But that was the first location. We launched it in November 27th, 2005, with huge support from the then president of Yes, Christian Jensen, a friend of mine from Yale Lacrosse, and all of the Yes members participating, either in using the product and giving feedback, marketing the product to other customers. At that time, because there weren't smartphones, it was a text message ordering version of Olo. So it involves a whole extensive sign-up where you had to create an account, put your credit card on file, link your phone to that account, and then build your favorite orders, text yourself a personal menu, and then you could reply to that menu with the number of the order that you wanted to your specification. It was really rudimentary, but it was a hit. People loved using it. The coffee shop loved having guests use it. And there were some really great learnings and surprises that came out of that experience. Like, it wasn't just coffee that people were ordering, it was also things like paninis. And in particular, Yale law students loved ordering paninis before a law course started, because there might be a line, there might not be a line, but paninis take a while for the cheese to melt, and knowing they could order at 12:45, have it ready, and then walk into a 1 o'clock class, just took all of the guesswork out of it. And that really expanded our lens to think, this isn't just for coffee shops, this is for coffee shops and restaurants. Anybody that has a long wait in line or a long food prep time or anything that's very customized, where the guest is doing it just to their liking.
Right. So you have 0 customers at the beginning.
Yes.
How do you convince Common Grounds to adopt your platform?
So initially, dogged determination in contacting the owner, Tracy Jackson of then Coffee 2, and a connection. One of my roommates before my wife and I moved in together, when I first moved to New York, was a great acoustic guitar player and had done some gigs at Coffee 2. And so she knew Tracy and had her email address from that experience. And she made the connection to Tracy, and then I just followed up and came to visit. easy to jump on the Metro North and be here pretty quickly. And I said, look, I don't want to charge you anything to use this, but I'm a Yaley, I used to come here, and I'm going to bring all of the Yale Entrepreneurial Society to come and work on this, but I really think it could be an exciting thing to let your guests skip the line to get their coffee faster.
Right.
And I think at the time, the best way of explaining it was by way of analogy and saying, this is going to be sort of like using Easy Pass on the highway, that skip the line experience. It's going to be like using Fandango to buy movie tickets, but it's going to be for a coffee shop. And I think she thought I was probably a little crazy as well, but it was free, and I was going to bring a lot of students in and use some of that initial $500,000 on buying people coffee and brownies, and that's what we did.
Wow, that's fantastic. Super, super interesting. And so now let's talk a little about Olo's growth and get Will involved here too. So how do you go from a small startup? So you're offering the service for Common Grounds for free. So how do you transition from this phase to a public company that now processes more than 2 million orders per day? And what major roadblocks did you face, and what skills and insights did you rely on to overcome those obstacles? So first I'll ask Will during your time there, and then Noah, you can add on.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with, being a company around for now over 20 years, or around 20 years. I think just the determination that Noah shared in that story. And when you talk to our customers, we had one customer who mentioned that at every conference, Noah would just bug him and bug him and bug him until he decided to take on Olo as a product. And I think having that scrappiness throughout the company in the early stages is what I imagine got us to the point to when I joined.
Seems like you guys have that in common.
Yes, we like to nag, and yes. So, and then when I joined Olo, I think Noah realized, and I don't want to speak for him, but he could bring a great group of people around him to help him scale to the next level and help go from a startup with, I think, 13 people in 2013 to now over 700 people today, and bringing in people who have been from not just the 0 to 1 journey, but the 1 to 10, and then the 10 to 100 journey. And I was fortunate to come at a time when I think we had around 150 people, 200 people, really hiring a lot, really in this growth mode. And at the time, it was really problem solving at scale. There were so many problems, there was so much demand for the product. They had done a lot of the hard work to get product market fit, and it was really about figuring out how to do things at scale and do that well. Nagging people at conferences couldn't be the only approach. We needed to have proper marketing, we needed to have proper business operations, looking at the data and metrics, and I think that was a really fun stage for me to join the company.
Yeah, I think of course, a lot of that is right. I think even before that, a lot of kind of consumer technology evolution happened. So obviously we went from a place where 5% had smartphones to a place where everybody knew about this magical thing called the iPhone, and then it actually existed, and everybody got iPhones. And those were separate moments in time when we really got to ubiquity of smartphones. Then also on-demand services came into sort of the popular consciousness, things like Uber, and the idea that you could use this device and summon a car to come pick you up, and it would know where you were, and it would know how you wanted to pay, and then you could have this kind of magical experience. By the way, that's interesting. That's another company seeded by David Frankel in the earliest days, but I think from a similar insight of on-demand commerce was going to become a big thing when smartphones were ubiquitous. So I think with all of those changes in how consumers were using technology, restaurants started to see that there was a big opportunity. And so it took many, many years of waiting. And to Will's point, the first 8 years of Olo's story, from founding in 2005 until that 2013 era, we were a 12, 13 person company. We were lean and mean. I was the only salesperson. I was very persistent with people. But we stayed very scrappy, and we made sure that we were able to have a long runway, because we knew it was going to take a long time for the technology to catch up with the vision. And then when it did, it was like everybody wanted to have an app. Every restaurant chief marketing officer wanted to have an app. Nobody had the skill set to do it in-house. And so there was huge, huge demand for what we were providing, and we just couldn't meet that demand as a 13-person company. So we needed to scale up. And we brought on a really great team that had done that before and helped us to scale from 12 people up to 600 people in a very short window of time, like an 8-year window of time. And then we were at the point where we knew we had become a mission critical software for a lot of the restaurants that we worked with. And that was right before COVID hit. So we were at the moment at about the scale where you could go public as a software company. And we had drafted our S1. We were on file with
And
the
what year
SEC.
is this?
This is in 2020.
Okay.
January, February 2020. And then March of 2020, COVID hits, and we didn't know what that was going to mean for our business, what that was going to mean for our industry. We were, at the time, about 8% of overall restaurant transactions were digital transactions. And overnight, it went from 8 up to about 16%. It effectively doubled the percentage of digital mix in the restaurant industry. Huge accelerant for our business. What was probably mission critical became absolutely mission critical for so many of our customers, and really was sort of the life or death thing. Did you have these capabilities or didn't you? If you didn't, and you didn't have a drive-through, you really couldn't keep your restaurant open and serving guests. So that really propelled us forward, and by the time the dust sort of cleared from COVID, or the initial wave of COVID, we were able to pick up the pieces at the end of 2020, and then actually go through with the IPO in March of 2021.
Wow, outstanding. And what is the penetration now of digital to overall transactions?
The penetration is now above COVID levels. It's for the first time over the last couple of quarters, we're now at 18% of overall transactions that are digital. And that might not seem like a lot, but remember, this is a massive industry. It is a 60 billion transaction per year industry. So that's a really big number of transactions that are digital. And to Will's point earlier, it's a $1.2 trillion sales industry just in the US alone. So I think we're still super early in the overall digital transformation of restaurants. And now Olo is incredibly well positioned with 700 enterprise brands across 82,000 locations on our platform, and seeing traffic rise, quarter over quarter, month over month, week over week.
And the prevailing view at the time was after COVID that volumes would go back to 8 or 9%.
Right.
And what we've seen is really the secular trend over time that Noah saw in 2005 is a decades long trend. It's not a year by year trend, and we expect it to continue to rise.
Exciting. So from my own experiences and observations, I know that being an entrepreneur is hard. It's very hard. So let's talk more about being an entrepreneur in general. So what are the benefits and drawbacks of being an entrepreneur, and what drives you to persevere when it feels like nothing's going right?
Yeah, it is hard. And there are times when it feels like things are nice and easy, but those are very rare. The whole thing is hard. The different stages are hard. The hardest part for me was those early years when you have this vision, you think it's right, it doesn't really map onto the world that exists, and your job is to tell the story to every stakeholder group, to your early team, to your investors, to your board. Oftentimes that's the same thing. And then of course to customers, to say, I know you can't see it now, but this is where things are going, and here are the proof points that lead me to that conclusion. And when that's the case, you're going to want to have this thing. That's hard to do, and you can go a little crazy telling the same story again and again, and having people say, but I don't see that. What are you talking about? You might be a visionary. You also might be a crazy person. I don't really know if I can judge that. So having an early team that's really bought into that vision and is eager to look for the proof points of success, I think is the most incredible gift that you can have as an early stage entrepreneur. And I had, for those first 8 years, those people, those early 12 people in the company, they were real diehard believers in that vision. And we would, every time there was something to celebrate, we would celebrate in a big way. And we also just had an incredible pain tolerance, is the reality. I mean, because it's really hard. And we would buck each other up and say, we were in this together. And we had this phrase that we used that was a phrase the Marines use of embrace the suck, of this is really bad, but if we can get through this and other people can't, we're going to be the last people standing, and we need to just embrace that adversity, because it's going to set us apart from everybody else. And that was the spirit of the early team, and it really served us well and gave us this great foundation such that when we found that product market fit 8 years into the journey, we could then scale that team and what made that team special from a 12-person team to a 600-person team.
And I think a lot of those values that you established in that period, we still have as company values now, like during those periods of strife. So.
Right. Well, kudos to you guys for sticking out. The next chapters of the story look pretty good and will continue to be so, hopefully. So how do you think in that tough phase when you have this vision and it's not yet turning into reality, well, how do you think about sort of the optimal quitting point? How do you know whether to stop or whether to keep going?
I don't know that I ever really seriously thought about stopping, is the honest answer. And this is a blessing and a curse. The blessing of it is I really felt like once I had other people's money, once I was, responsible for steering the ship with all these other people who had spent their formative years right out of college working with me and devoting themselves to this vision, I felt like we must keep going, and I felt like I am effectively strapped to the mast of this ship. That's a curse too, because it's very hard to, on a bad day for the company, not take it intensely personally and feel like this is a bad day for me. I myself am a failure because the company had a bad day or somebody said no today. But I don't know that I ever really thought about quitting. And when I talk about the test that David put me to of withdraw from Harvard Business School, don't just defer, withdraw. Quit your job at Endeavor. Like there's no other path. You must keep going forward. That was a real gift because so much of it, I have a sign that my wife got me a couple weeks ago based on the toll booth signs when they went to electronic tolls, and the sign says, "Do not stop," because they were trying to teach drivers, like, you don't have to stop and pay the toll, just keep going. But for me, it became this mantra of don't stop, just keep moving forward, live another day, and something good will happen, and you'll be able to go from there to the next phase. And so I don't know that I ever really took quitting as an option.
I love it. Well, that's the essence of the entrepreneurial spirit, is it not? So many Yale innovators are interested in either bringing a more entrepreneurial mindset to a larger company or working for a startup or starting their own. So you choose the middle option of working for a startup. So what made you choose that option, and how would you recommend people in that position can strengthen their candidacy for that?
Yeah, so it really started at Yale when I took Yale in America, which I don't know if any of you have taken, but really great class, really highly recommend it. And I got advice from Sam Chauncey, who was teaching the class with Jay Gitlin, that at some point in my career, I had to get off the metaphorical treadmill and try something different. I had just finished a internship at Goldman Sachs doing investment banking, and I was very much on a traditional path of going into banking, maybe going into private equity, and that being my career. But I'd always had this passion for the restaurant industry. So from encouragement from Sam, I decided to take the leap and go into restaurants and started working in kitchens at Gramercy Tavern and Union Square Hospitality Group, not knowing that it would lead me to the software sector, but knowing it's something I really wanted to do and was really passionate about. So I think at some point, it was really, looking back, it was really great advice to get off the treadmill. I think everyone here is a very high achiever and goes from achievement to achievement and not taking a step back to think about really what you want to do in life. And I think early on in my career, I was blessed to get that advice and take a step back, reflect, and decide what to do. So that's how I got there. In terms of that phase of growth and why I've learned a lot from it, I think you learn a lot about the scrappy founder mentality, and then you learn a lot about how to set up functions and scale for a company really to be successful. Noah knows this, but my dream is to be an entrepreneur one day too. And I think I've learned from Noah the entrepreneurial spirit, and then from people like Noah and around the company who have been a part of scale-ups, learned how to really do that well and bring in the right people. So I think it's really a great place to learn, and I think it's a great place for people who want to learn a generalist skill set on how to problem solve and how to make a difference.
Fantastic. And I guess since we're sort of on this topic, So I suspect a number of our students here are interested in entrepreneurship and want to build something, but don't really know where to start. So I guess it's more of a question for you, Noah. So what would you recommend to these people? How do they go about that process of creating an idea?
Yeah, I think when you have an idea, listen for those that are like the Taylor Swift songs that you can't get out of your head, like the sort of the earworm kind of ideas that you just can't forget about. Those are typically the ones that, something in you, your heart's just into it. And that was definitely the case for me and what is now Olo. It was an idea that I wrote down in 2003, I mentioned, when I first moved to New York, and then it sort of stuck with me in South Africa in 2004. But I only launched it in 2005 when everything had sort of lined up. And even still, we were like very early by any standard. But that idea sort of stuck with me from what was just, a thought one day into something that I'd written into a business plan, into something that I then found some engineers to help me turn into a working prototype, into something that I could then show the business plan and the prototype and do some very basic market analysis of what the total addressable market looked like, and get an investor to say, I don't know about this, but I know about you enough that I'll take a chance on you. And I think that's the only way I know about how to go from idea stage into, okay, I'm going to put everything else on hold and move forward with this idea.
Right. You want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been part of that journey yet, but I think what I've learned from Noah's story and others is it always feels like it always looks linear looking backwards, but it's never linear, and there are always moments where you zig and zag, and the people who make it farthest are able to handle those challenges. So I think embrace the suck, embrace the challenges. I think that's how you are able to look back and be proud of what you did.
Well said. So let's talk a little about Yale now. So both of you were very involved on campus during your time here. So could you share a bit about your experience at Yale and how it shaped your entrepreneurial journey?
I think for me, the single best thing about my Yale experience is that I met my now wife here. And I say that not just because it changed my life in every other dimension, but because we really launched the company together in the early days, as I mentioned. And having made other connections to Christian Jensen at Yale Entrepreneurial Society and the Yale Lacrosse team and the Baker's Dozen when I was back and launching at Common Grounds, or what was Coffee 2 back then, I had this group of built-in Olo users, and that was really exciting to be able to show up and actually get that real-time feedback. So I think all the connections that I made, and of course, doing things with teams, playing lacrosse, singing a cappella, both examples of teamwork, that was super helpful and really transferred over into the working world of first Endeavor and then later Olo in the very early days.
And also, is there any particular moments of your Yale experience that you look back at and realize that you were kind of made to be an entrepreneur? Are there any particular experiences here that should have informed your decision earlier on what you might want to do with your future?
I think really it was the things I did outside of Yale over the summers that most shaped my thinking, that I think I'd want to do something in consumer tech startup. I got an opportunity in the summer of 2000 to work at Shutterfly.com, and that was the peak of .com 1.0, the bubble. And it was amazing to see, this new consumer device arrives, the digital camera, and it completely reshapes an industry of photo printing. So I think if I connect the dots, that's a similar insight that we're about to get smartphones, and that's going to reshape an industry, and that's food. But then coming back to Yale and thinking about what is the coursework that I can do, what's the major I should do. I did political science, but I focused on international relations, and within that, international development, which is really what led me to Endeavor. But it was really the closest thing that I could find to a study in entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship and their impact on the economy. And then taking other courses outside of the major that kind of rounded out my thinking: computer science, statistics, philosophy. I mean, a lot of these things were not political science credits, but they were really helpful for me in thinking about ideas and storytelling and the idea and the narrative, but also the numbers. And I think all of that was what the Yale experience did to shape me and made me into an entrepreneur. And then on the pain tolerance side of things, I mentioned the Habitat bicycle trip that I did across the country. That was intensely painful and physically painful, but it sort of gave me this great belief in myself and that I had a very deep reservoir to draw from and could make it through really hard things. And that's been a lot of the experience of running a company and starting a company, is being able to draw on that reservoir of self-confidence and know that I can do things even though they seem impossible.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I think Yale overall, I mean, I've always been a big believer. I was a history major, urban studies. I've always been a big believer in a generalist skill set and being able to have the skills to learn. And I think what Yale does an amazing job of is teaching you how to think, how to learn, and that really applies to entrepreneurship, where everything you're doing is different every single time. And I think having that skill set is critical. And I think in terms of experiences, being a golfer on the golf team, again, I can imagine being an entrepreneur in the future, being alone on the golf course by yourself. Everything is on you to solve problems, figure it out in moments of strife. I can imagine looking back on that experience and connecting it to my future career. And I think Yale challenges you both in academics and athletics in so many ways that really prepares you for the next stage.
Yeah, well said. So also, speaking of golf, so I read on your Yale golf bio that your father also attended Yale and that your older brother actually served as team captain for the golf team 4 years before you. So Yale's undoubtedly a special place for you and your family. So in your view, what's it about Yale that makes it such a transformative experience for you and other students?
Yeah, I think it starts with just the whole culture of Yale, and I think a lot of schools can become very competitive and students are competing against each other for academic achievements. I think Yale is really about the process of learning, which is, you can't point to one test score, you can't point to one result, but it's really about the process of how to think, how to learn, like I said before. And I think that's really unique. As I talk to my friends who went to other schools, much more competitive, much more cutthroat. I think Yale is very inclusive in that way. And I think in terms of what Yale has done, even since I've left, I think there's such a diversity of resources now between the Tsai CITY and Science Hill and Schwartzman Center is new. Like there's so much you can take from Yale and apply it to your future career. So I just encourage students to take advantage of the time. I was here 6 years ago. It feels like ages ago, and it goes by fast. So really enjoy it and leverage all the resources Yale has to offer. And maybe you'll make a connection one day and it'll end up being part of your career, which is what happened with me and Noah.
Outstanding, yeah. So much has changed since you guys graduated from Yale, namely the Tsai CITY Center, which did not exist for either of you. And then we even have a pre-orientation program. I don't know if you guys remember FOOT. We have one called Launch, which is specifically geared toward entrepreneurship for our students. So knowing sort of what you know now about life and Yale, what advice would you give to current students as they navigate their time in college? And what do you think they should prioritize, and what do you think they should avoid?
Well, first, I really want to applaud Yale and all of the people who made these things happen, because that was not the case when I was here. I mean, Yale Entrepreneurial Society existed based on the great work of some really entrepreneurially minded students that came before me who really felt that there was a gap in the Yale experience. But it's amazing to see how that's blossomed. I mean, I look out at the front and I see all of those companies, and I know a lot of the people who are part of those companies, and I can sort of draw the network connections from one company to another. So it's great to see that flourishing, and I think really soak that up, because I'll tell you, when I went to a job fair my junior year, my senior year, it was like consulting firm, investment bank, General Mills, there must have been some alum connection there, law firms. That was it. And there was nothing, of course, if you're an entrepreneur, there's nothing there that's your company, so you have to go create it. But there was nothing that felt like an option aside from those options. And the fact that you can be at Yale and learn that there are resources here to help you launch, to help you start up, to help connect you with classmates who are like-minded. That's awesome. That's really, really worth celebrating, and I'm thrilled that we're participating today as part of that legacy.
Yeah, great. Tons of new resources at Yale, and your advice to the students, take advantage of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo everything Noah said, and yeah, just encourage everyone to take advantage of the resources here. Even in my time 6 years ago, again, it wasn't the case. So even from Noah's generation to my generation, it felt like things were pretty similar. I think in the last 6 or 7 years, Yale has really taken it to the next level in terms of promoting different career paths. I remember at the time graduating, I read a stat that 33% of students went into consulting, and that just shocked me as a stat. Yale, everyone majors in humanities, and then everyone goes into consulting. It struck me as odd. So it's great to see that everyone, there's a lot of commitment to different career paths and promoting that.
Yeah, well said. So I think we have about 10 minutes left, is that right? So I'd like to open it to audience questions. So if you guys have a question, just raise your hand, and I think Claire will come over and give the mic to you.
So yes, just to expedite this and make it go smoothly, what I'm going to do is hand it to the first person. When you're finished with your question, if you would stand up and see who's raised their hand for the second question. And please start by introducing yourself and your school or program and your graduation year.
Hi, my name is Owen. I'm a first year in Yale College. And my question is, does OLO have any particular meaning, like the name?
It does. It will sort of date the name a little bit. Before OLO the company, there was OLO the acronym in restaurant technology, and the acronym stands for online ordering. Now, when you all think about online, you probably think, well, that's one word. Why would it be online? It was back in the late 90s that you had things like America Online, AOL, and online ordering in that time when OL was online, the industry term was online ordering. So we were able to, I want to say it was December of 2010, we had a different name initially. We were able to purchase the domain name olo.com for $1,750. And that was an amazing coup to get the name of the thing that we were trying to become the leader in, even though we started in 2005 and had already been around for at least 6 years. So that's the meaning of OLO.
Hi, my name is Marco. I'm a senior in Yale College. I had a question about the hiring process for the first people in your team and even now hiring people at scale. What do you look for, and what are some tells when you have 30 minutes to sort of meet with somebody? You can ask them a story and something like this, but maybe you're not really getting the full picture. What do you guys do to make sure that you're finding someone that's scrappy and thoughtful and has all the characteristics you'd like in an employee?
We start by asking, did you go to Yale? No, but actually it is true. Some of our very earliest employees were classmates of mine or classmates of my wife's, and there was, for all the reasons that Will said, this sort of shared understanding that somebody was intellectually curious and hardworking and humble, almost by definition. That sort of felt like the fabric of Yale and the common variable. But I think the best question that we ask, given that it's always true that the people that we're interviewing could probably get a job at hundreds, thousands of other places, we really ask about our mission. And David mentioned it earlier, that we talk about hospitality being the industry that we serve, and our goal with our technology of enabling hospitality at scale and enabling restaurants to make every guest feel like a regular. If that resonates for somebody and they're really passionate about it and they can really speak to why they're so passionate, that even though they can work at 100 or 1,000 different places, this is the place they want to work, that always lands best for me. Obviously they need to have the hard skills that we need, but that drive, that motivation, that why of why OLO is a really important factor for me.
And it's amazing how many of our employees, their brother works in the restaurant industry or their parents were in the restaurant industry, and there's very different functional skill sets, but it all comes back to that, want to help the restaurant industry, which is great.
Hi, my name is Yuto, Yale College, a junior right now. So you were mentioning how you studied political science, and it's not related to what you do now. So you're making an app. So I guess like what would be directly related would be studying computer science, for example. So I guess my question is, given that what you might want to do is like your entrepreneurship is different from the skills you might get in college or what you might think you're gonna do like in the future, like what kind of skills do you recommend, or like what kind of knowledge, what kind of experience do you want to build in college, given it doesn't directly translate?
I actually think that it does directly translate my political science background, and specifically, I didn't mention this, I should have, game theory was the thing that I took as part of political science, but as something that I wasn't really sure of and just kind of sounded fun, game theory. Understanding how tit for tat works or other sort of game theory dynamics has been completely part of the story of Olo, because what we are now, we are integrated into all these 700 restaurants. That's kind of one side of what we do. We also have technology partners, 400 different technology partners who integrate typically through Olo into all those restaurants. There's a lot of politics that goes on in there, and there's a lot of game theory that goes on in there. So actually what I do, what I spend most of my time doing in sort of balancing these stakeholder groups is very directly applicable to what I studied. There was no kind of product development discipline at Yale that I could see when I was here, so I learned that as a intern at Shutterfly with the product management team, and that's sort of where I got some of those skills. I took computer science entry level, so I had a basic understanding. I'm lucky to have a brother who is a Carnegie Mellon computer science wizard, and so I kind of always had a working knowledge, the ability to speak to an engineer about a product and how it could be built using the technology that they were used to building in. But I really think my orientation as a leader is really around sales and product and the interplay of those two things, and that's a feedback loop. I mean, going and speaking to a customer, getting their feedback about why it's not the right thing for them, using that to rethink the product and build in new capabilities. That's a really nice thing to have in the same brain, and in the earliest days, it was me doing the selling and it was me doing the product management, and it was important that those were skills that I had. But I think it was part of what I learned at Yale, and it was part of what I learned out in the working world in my summer internships at Endeavor, and then applying that all together for Ola.
Hi, I'm Walter. I'm a first year in Yale College, and I was wondering how the process of fundraising went, because you mentioned you got $500,000 from David Frankel, and then you IPO'd in 2021. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff in there.
Yeah.
How does that work? Were you finding the funds from people, or were they approaching you? Or?
I wish I could tell you that people were just throwing money at us the whole way. Very much not the case. That first funding round was probably the only easy funding round that we did. And even that took a lot of kind of sweat equity and building out the prototype and writing the business plan and working on this as a nights and weekends project before it came together. Every time we went and raised funding, our Series A, our Series B, our Series C, our Series D, it was difficult every single time. My mom can tell you the story. We'd be in Boston, we'd be driving around to different, Waltham, Massachusetts, venture capitalist offices, Boston venture capitalist offices, and everyone would say no. And it would be like 20, 30 rejections, and you just had to keep moving forward and not stop. It always felt like we were too big for the last funding round and too small for the next funding round, and always a tweener, kind of in between in terms of our metrics. One great thing was that in 2014, we raised a funding round that included Danny Meyer, who is a legend in our industry. He is the founder of Shake Shack, is probably how you all would know him around here, but a great restaurateur in New York City. And he had just left the board of Open Table in the restaurant reservation space, and Olo was his next big thing. that gave us a ton of credibility and cachet with investors. I'd say around the later funding rounds and the IPO, it was a lot easier. It was a lot easier. But I'm very proud that if you look at our net burn, meaning how much we spent versus how much we still had in the bank at the time of our IPO, we were at $120 million of ARR, annualized recurring revenue, and our net burn was $6 million for the entire time, 16 years up until the IPO. So what that means in this context is we were just very scrappy and judicious with spending. We lasted a really long time. We had to. And we raised around, I remember this very well, March 17th of 2008. And it was right before the Great Recession, where there were like no funding rounds done after that for a long time. So we raised what seemed like a gargantuan sum of money, $7 million in that funding round. And we just needed to make that last as long as we possibly could. And we really did. We made it last until the end of 2012. And it's just sort of being scrappy and hanging on and refusing to quit that enabled us to do it.
Being an entrepreneur is hard, but quitting is not in these guys' vocabulary. It's great. So we have time for just one more question.
Hi, I'm Oliver. I'm a freshman. So what point did you realize you'd found product market fit and you wanted to grow the current product rather than changing it?
Yeah, it was really in this 2013 moment. So I remember that I think Domino's Pizza, which was one of the original online ordering platforms where the name Olo probably originated, Domino's Pizza, they had gotten to over 50% of sales that were through their digital channel. And Starbucks had launched the Starbucks app. And when it felt like, okay, pizza is one category, coffee is an extremely different category, every restaurant in between in terms of product hold time and customization, fast casual restaurants, casual dining restaurants, family dining restaurants, even fast food restaurants were saying, we need an app, we need the ability to do order ahead, skip the line at our restaurant if Starbucks is doing it and Domino's is doing the majority of their business through this. That moment was the product market fit moment that you dream about. And we were a 12-person company. It was scary because we'd been so scrappy for so long. And then there was all this demand. And it was this terrifying moment where it felt like if we don't scale the team up, we will have waited 8 years, gotten to profitability, yay, but we're going to miss the train when the train leaves the station. So that was a moment where we had to really change the way that we thought and raise a funding round to scale the company, to Will's point, bring in a management team that had scaled up from a 12-person company to a 600-person company over the next 8 years. And I think we got the train right when it left the station as a result, but it took a lot of patience, and it took identifying that moment very crisply and saying, this is it, we've got to scale now. We've got to go from a startup to a scale up.
Wow, well guys, thank you so much. This has been incredible, very insightful. And on behalf of Tsai CITY, we'd like to present you with these gifts. Noah?
Wow, thank you so much.
Will?
Thank
Let's
you
give
so
these guys
much.
a round of applause.